don't know if I'm going to be able to do this broadcast or not. I don't have a producer because he got put on a week's paid leave by the Monster Island Board of Directors. Some of us can only dream about that. Hey, who's that in the booth right now? Oh, hi, Jet. How you doing? Okay, my JJ speak is still a little bit rusty, but I'm pretty sure you just said you're doing well. That's good to know. So, what exactly are you doing? Come again? Really? You are going to be my producer today. Well, that's interesting. Oh, what's that you got for me there? Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Do I really have to read this? Of course I do. The board will be happy with nothing less, obviously. All right, Jet, put me on the air. On Saturday, October 31st, 2020, there was an incident involving one of our employees and the Matango Containment Laboratory. At approximately 22:45, James B. Morgan entered the MCL to attend to his temporary duties as caretaker over the Matango. After beginning to feel weak and disoriented, Morgan was rushed to the Monster Island Infirmary for immediate observation. We are pleased to announce that he has now been deemed healthy with seemingly no physical or psychological impairment. Morgan will be given a full week to recover with pay, and we wish him a speedy recovery. Furthermore, we've since investigated the root cause of the situation and determined it was a malfunction caused by the mishandling of equipment by one of our Monster Island interns. The board will be taking swift and immediate action to make sure an incident like this never happens again. The intern in question will be shown a better way forward, following what could have been an extremely tragic situation. Signed, the Monster Island Board of Directors. I will never get over how Orwellian their little catchphrase sounds. All right, Ben will be here soon, and we've got a movie to talk about. Live from Ogasawara, this is the Monster Island Film Vault, episode 29, War of the Gargantuas, featuring Ben Chaffins. Hello, kaiju lovers, and welcome to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast seeking entertainment and enlightenment through tokusatsu. I am your host, Nathan Marchand, the curator of the Monster Island Film Vault. And joining me today is none other than Sci-Fi Japan writer Ben Chaffins. Hello, Ben.
Hello.
It's great to have you back, man. It's been a couple of months. How are things going with the book?
Yes. The book's, doing fairly well. With the whole situation we got going on now with COVID, it's kind of edging along.
Yeah, I've been reading it actually the last couple of months. I've been finding it really interesting. You got a lot of big names in that, but we talked about that a couple of months ago, right before the book came out. If anyone wants to know more about it, they can go listen to that interview.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Today, however, you're joining me to talk about a movie. Specifically, War of the Gargantuas, which is the pseudo-sequel, shall we call it, to Frankenstein Conquers the World. Yeah, it's a little confusing.
Yeah, which the original Japanese title is Frankenstein no kaiju Sanda and Gaira. So
yeah, it's tying it back, but the script, we'll get into that. Unfortunately, this is a little bit strange. I don't have Jimmy in the producer booth here with me today. He was given the week off after some shenanigans with the Matango over the weekend, even though he was given a clean bill of health at the Monster Island Infirmary. So today, I guess we have what you could call the next best thing in the producer booth with me today. Yep, everybody's favorite superhero robot, Jaguar. apparently Jimmy showed him how to run all the things in the producer booth this week.
I don't know how comfortable I feel with Jaguar doing that.
I guess we'll find out, right?
Right. Yeah, same to you, Jaguar. Go on about your business.
You can actually understand him? I've been reading Jimmy's manual that translates his noises and funny gestures, and I can still understand about half of it.
I can understand a little bit of robotics.
It's all that research you've been doing, diving into all of these Japanese films, translating stuff. You probably came across some of Goro Ibuki's notes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, so before we get into this, I'll give a quick little description about this movie. So it's War of the Gargantuas. We have a trio of scientists who are investigating these two humanoid monsters that are spawned from Frankenstein Conquers the World. And these big hairy creatures. One is running around attacking cities and eating people, which is terrifying. And then the other one is trying to keep his brother, and I have air quotes, brother, from doing that. That doesn't go well. They get into a big fight at the end, and it ends very tragically because this is derived from a Frankenstein story, and you can't have a Frankenstein story without a tragic ending.
Exactly.
Although we do have both Sanda and Gaira here on the island, but we have to keep them separated like kids, so we keep one on one side of the island and one on the other, and neither the two shall meet, or else it gets very, very ugly. So, to start off just real quick, Ben, what's your history with War of the Gargantuas?
I actually saw the movie come on Monster Vision on TNT years back, when we had the VHS tapes. You stuck them in the VHS player and you hit the record button and you could watch it again later, but that's my history with it. That's when I first saw it. I was roughly, 8, 9, maybe 10 years old.
Wow. So this was early in your kaiju fandom, correct?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I grew up without cable, so I didn't actually see War of the Gargantuas until much later, well into adulthood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But it was something I'd always heard about. I was always more interested, since I didn't have cable, I was always more interested in trying to collect the physical copies of the movie, so the VHSs, the DVDs, and all of that. And this one was really hard to come by. I had always heard about it, but you couldn't just walk into a video store or, Suncoast Motion Picture Company at the mall, which is where I got a lot of my stuff back in the day, and buy it. That is until Classic Media did us all a favor and finally put it out, which is what I have in my personal collection, which is what we watched today in preparation for today's broadcast. Although I will admit, for some odd reason, even though this is kind of countered, because Classic Media has a great reputation for their video quality on their DVDs. In fact, some people prefer them to the Criterion discs. But the Japanese cut of War of the Gargantuas is kind of murky for some odd reason, but the dub version looks great. It's weird.
Yeah, something with the transfers went haywire.
I guess. I don't know. So, what are your impressions of the movie? Well, let's start there.
As a kid, I enjoyed it. Thought it was very fun. Nowadays, it's probably one of the better kaiju movies I've seen. Although I just don't know where I would rank it.
That's interesting. Because I know it's really popular in the kaiju community. And I will admit, when I finally got around to watching it, I went into it with all that hype in my head for this movie. And then when I watched it, I thought, why do people love this? I'm sorry. Hot take. I really don't get it. Yeah. Every time I watch this movie, I am surprised that it just doesn't seem like there's a whole lot there. The kaiju stuff is great. It really is. The kaiju stuff is great. In fact, you know what the sad thing is? Sanda and Gaira might be the best characters in this movie.
Oh, without doubt.
Which is saying something.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. Mind you, this is at a point where, because this was written by Takeshi Kimura. I'm sure you've heard that name before. One of Toho's go-to screenwriters. The other one was Shinichi Sekizawa. At this point, Kimura was just writing for hire with Toho. He was no longer invested in anything he was writing. He wrote Matango, considered that his masterpiece, and then after that, it was just a job to him. And I have heard that he got to the point where he cynically thought that nobody really watched these movies for the characters. They're just there for the monster. So he started pumping out scripts with that in mind, which might explain why the kaiju stuff in this is great and the characters are lackluster, to say the least.
Like a recent 2019 movie that came out from Hollywood.
There's your hot take. I do have that movie on the docket, so we'll get to that.
Yeah,
at least we will on the show. But but yeah, I mean, a few weeks ago, I rewatched Frankenstein Conquers the World, which is the pseudo prequel to this, and I thought the characters in that were actually pretty good. I actually enjoyed that, and there were some things to chew on, and in this, there's just not a whole lot.
Yeah, you got Nick Adams in the somewhat prequel to everything with Frankenstein Conquers the World. I mean, Nick Adams is cash money.
Oh, yeah, he is, and it's too bad. Actually, it might be a blessing in disguise that Jimmy's not here today because he's got a serious man crush on Nick Adams. Seriously, he's called Nick Adams his spirit animal, whatever that means. And because Nick Adams played Glenn in Monster Zero, and he says Glenn trained him when he was at NASA, so it's this whole to-do. But he is not a fan of Russ Tamblyn, his replacement in this movie. And you know what? Neither am I.
That makes three of us. And, I think I figured out why Jimmy was given that week off. Him and our good friend Jack Hudgens are fighting over Nick Adams.
Oh, yeah, apparently. Yeah, that is a thing. Someone needs to tell them that Nick Adams is kind of dead. So... But all of that to say, well, let's talk about Tamblyn a little bit here. Have you seen West Side Story?
I have not.
Okay. Tamblyn was in West Side Story. I've seen West Side Story. It's honestly one of my favorite musicals. Yes, I can say that. It's an absolutely fantastic movie. It has every right to be a classic. And Tamblyn, he gives a great performance in that. So I know he can act. He just decided not to. He thought this movie was beneath him. There's a lot we could go into about how he behaved on the set of this movie. A lot of that is actually in my King Kong Escapes episode, which I believe was episode 6. So you can hear about it in more detail there. But to say he was difficult on this movie would be an understatement. And you can tell when you watch it, especially if you watch the dub version, his delivery is absolutely flat. He does not care. Say what you want about Nick Adams, but the guy did get nominated for an Oscar, and he gave it his all, every role that he had.
Yep.
Tamblyn didn't do it. This is the equivalent to someone being really good at their job, but then deciding not to do their job, because all I keep thinking is, Tamblyn, you have one job. You act. And you didn't do it.
And he failed. He failed miserably.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I think his dub actor, who, by the way, does get credit in the beginning of this movie, which I think is hilarious. And Tamblyn doesn't get top billing. I bet that ticked him off, too. I have no doubt.
Oh, yeah.
The dub actor has to enhance his performance. I think it's hilarious. Oh, my gosh. But anyway, yeah, we could go on about that for forever at this point. Let's talk about somebody who actually gives a decent performance in this. How about our man Nakajima? Horo Nakajima, who gets to play Gaira in this movie.
Yep.
And for what I understand, this was actually, he said, one of his favorite roles. And this is coming from the guy who played Godzilla for almost 20 years, and he said this was one of his favorite roles.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just Godzilla. He played some of the Ultra Kaiju as well for the Ultraman series.
Yeah, he made a career as a suit actor. But I've heard that one of the reasons he really loved being in this movie was the suit was a heck of a lot lighter.
Oh, for
it wasn't
sure.
a 200-pound Godzilla suit.
Yeah.
And this was something that I discussed a little bit also in a previous episode. I think it was King Kong 76. You actually get to see his, and in the Daimajin episodes, now that I think about it, you actually get to see his eyes in this movie.
Yeah.
It's one of the rare times you get to see the suit actor's eyes. So he was able to give an even better performance, I think, in his mind.
Yeah. But another thing, too, was the Godzilla movie that followed after this, Godzilla versus the Sea Monster. There's a scene where you could see part of his eyes and his head kind of shining through the Godzilla suit.
I remember was it you or someone else who pointed that out to me on Twitter? I forget. I think it was you. One of these days I need to find a screenshot of that.
Might have been Jack as well.
Oh, yeah. One of these days I need to find a screenshot of that because I'd love to see where it actually is. That would be hilarious.
I think it's the main last battle that he has with Ebira.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've talked about how this movie is a pseudo-sequel to Frankenstein Conquers the World. I'm still not 100% sure if it is a true sequel or not. There's talk about Frankenstein, but the things that happen in those flashbacks seem a little bit strange compared to the other movies. I've also read some essays that claimed that these are the same characters from Frankenstein Conquers the World, but with different names, which I don't really buy that. I'm looking at this and thinking, okay, these are just the same actors other than Tamblyn playing different characters that just happen to be really similar. It's not the first time this has happened. That also happened going from Mysterians to Battle in Outer Space, although in that case it was different characters with the same names. It's really strange. But in this one, which actually reminds me a little bit of Reptilicus. Have you ever seen Reptilicus?
We don't talk about that movie.
Okay. I know, papier-mâché monster, but the origin of the Gargantuas in this, Sanda and Gaira, is that they are pieces of flesh from Frankenstein that have grown into these other monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And there's talk of Frankenstein at frequent points. If you pay attention to the Japanese dialogue, you'll hear the name Frankenstein a lot. But it's still weird, and it's a little bit precarious as a sequel. Although, what's interesting is a lot of people forget that Frankenstein Conquers the World takes place in 1960. And this movie, as far as we know, takes place in the year it was released, so 1966. So as far as we know, there was a 6-year gap between the movies, which does help smooth some things over, but it's still weird. So I mentioned that Gaira goes around eating people. This is not something we typically see in a Toho kaiju movie.
Well, unless you count Rodan, but again, that's more off-screen stuff.
Yeah, that was more implied than anything else. And I guess you could say the Mega Neuron in that movie, Mega Neuron, whichever way you like to say it, were probably eating those miners. But that's about it. Well, and I guess there's also the implication that Varan ate those guys that came onto his mountain. But like I said, anything before this has been implied. This one, there is no hiding it. Gaira is literally popping people in his mouth like they're popcorn and spitting out their clothes after he chews them up, which is kind of horrifying.
Oh, good. Yeah. Oh, man.
I mean, even King Kong didn't eat people. He bit them. He put them in his mouth and bit them, but he didn't eat them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least the good thing for him, at least the clothes didn't get stuck in his throat.
Okay. You have transitioned us to a very important thing. The most infamous thing in this movie that gets punned and joked about in the fandom everywhere. This Kishi song. The words get stuck in my throat, man. I think there's actually a couple different versions of this, because if you look up this clip on YouTube, I swear there's a version that actually sounds worse, and I think it might be from the dub. I think it actually sounds worse in the dub.
Oh, wow.
Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. My mother is a singer with perfect pitch, and I think if I played this song for her, it might kill her. She'd have a brain hemorrhage and die. It is... What the heck?
Yeah, that's why we don't play the song.
I'm not playing the song. I am sparing the kaiju lovers and the listeners right now. I will not torture you with this because I don't need your ears to start bleeding. It's just, and there's weird stuff. There's weird stuff with this song. Yeah, supposedly the woman who sings this, Kip Hamilton, supposedly, according to Tamblyn, so take it with a kaiju-sized grain of salt, the only reason that she's in the movie singing that song is because she was supposedly producer Henry G. Saperstein's girlfriend at the time. Say what you want about that.
Yeah, no comment.
Yeah. And, oh my gosh, who wrote this? I would love to know who wrote this song. I don't know if it was Kimura, which is interesting because Sekizawa, he was a songwriter too, so he'd actually write the songs that appear in his script. So, this will blow your mind. He actually wrote the lyrics to Mothra's song.
I knew that.
Yeah, but I don't know if Kimura wrote this.
I have no input on that on all. I couldn't tell you who wrote it.
Yeah, but I will tell you, this does not sound like a top 40 radio love song to me.
It's not even elevator music. Whoa, come on.
No, although that sounds like something that the board of directors would do here. They would start playing this song in all the elevators. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said that. Now they're actually going to do it. Those jerks. No, I mean, like, it's got lyrics like microphone, amplify, turn the power on. I mean, she's talking like, I would turn the power on in my heart or something like that. What the heck? It sounds like something you would hear in a commercial.
Maybe that's it. That's where the song originated. They probably seen different types of commercials. Like, okay, we'll just take lyrics out of what each person said, put it together.
But then hilariously, it's like Gaira subtly was channeling the audience because in that nightclub scene, what does he do? He reaches in and he grabs that woman and she stops singing. Yeah. And then you think he's going to eat her and he doesn't. I'm sure everybody was rooting for him to eat her at that point. But no, he just drops her. And I guess some people would like to pretend that she died, but we don't really know. If she's still alive, I wonder if the board would try to arrange for her to come sing at a shindig here on the island. That'd be a little terrifying.
Yeah. I can't imagine if he did actually hear that maybe the song would still play like a voice recorder thing going off in his throat. still going off.
I want that fan edit. I want it where like he eats her and then you just, every time he opens his mouth, you just hear, the words get stuck in my throat. And then he like closes his mouth like, what the frick was that? The words get, like, every time he gets into a fight with Sanda and his mouth opens, you just hear the song just keeps coming out.
Yeah, Sanda stops in his tracks and it's like, what is this?
And then Sanda will be like, well, it's the song, man. I mean, you shouldn't have eaten her. I mean,
yeah.
Oh my goodness. It's just one of so many decisions in this movie that I don't entirely understand. I really don't.
Yeah, it's anybody's guess.
At this point. So, since we're still on the subject of Sanda and Gaira, let's talk about the ending here a little bit. Now, because like I said, Sanda and Gaira are the best characters in this movie. And I have to say, both Nakajima and...
I think it was Yu Cicada.
Yes, Yu Cicada. Yeah. Cicada. They give wonderful performances in this. Their body language is impeccable. Now, some credit should be given to the sound editors on this movie, but my gosh, they really know how to work those suits. Their body language tells you everything. Well, almost everything. And It is remarkable. So we get to the end of this movie, and as I sort of joked at the beginning, it's something of a tragic ending. Do you think it's a tragic ending? Like, I think it is.
In a way, yeah. I mean, it's basically two brothers fighting to the death, kind of like Cain and Abel.
Yeah, which is interesting because I have heard a lot of people compare this to Cain and Abel. It definitely fits in with that sort of archetype. For those who may not know, Cain and Abel is a Bible story. They were the first two sons born to Adam and Eve after they were expelled from the garden. Cain was the older son. and they both offered sacrifices to God. Cain's was rejected, but Abel's was accepted, and then, infamously, Cain murdered his brother and then was cursed by God for it. So he committed the first murder.
Yep.
And you see it in this. Although, as I found out doing my research, it's not so much the Cain and Abel story, but I found it was actually in the Honda biography this was brought up. It may have actually been inspired by a Japanese story called The Sea Boy and the Mountain Boy. Have you ever heard of this? Umihiko and Yamahiko?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I have a little summary here that I'll read for you just to kind of, I mean, the story's longer. It's from the Kojiki, which if you want to know about the Kojiki, because it's this collection of Japanese myths. It was written in the 700s AD. You can hear about that in episode 13 on the Three Treasures. So, the older brother, Umihiko, was a fisherman, while Yamahiko was a hunter from the mountains. The brothers exchanged their respective gear, a bow and a fishing hook, and traded places and jobs. That didn't go well. Yamahiko loses his brother's fishhook. The younger brother tries making 500 and then 1,000 fishhooks from a broken sword, but that didn't satisfy the older brother. An old man helps Yamahiko build a boat to search for the fishhook, and after being carried away by the current, Yamahiko finds a fish scale palace and meets a princess who takes a liking to him, as usually happens with these things. She takes him to her father, the sea god. He asks if anyone had swallowed the fishhook, and the sea god finds it in the mouth of a red snapper. The sea god gives him the fishhook, telling him to recite what was essentially a curse when he gave it to his brother, and 2 jewels that controlled the tides. Later, the brothers' respective peoples... By the way, I forgot to mention in this that Yamahiko then rides a crocodile back to the mainland. Later, the brothers' respective peoples plant rice fields, and Yamahiko's was better. Umihiko, out of jealousy, attacks his brother and takes that rice field. Yamahiko uses the high tide jewel, which floods the rice fields. Umihiko cries out to his brother as he drowns, and Yamahiko lowers the tide with the other jewel. Umihiko apologizes and submits to working for Yamahiko. Now, there's other details in the story because Yamahiko marries the princess, and there's all this to do about that in some later chapters in the Kojiki, but this is the part of the story that is most pertinent to our discussion here. This is definitely a loose adaptation, to say the least.
Yep.
But it definitely fits in with this archetypal story, 2 brothers battling each other. Although the characters admit that calling them brothers is a little bit of a loose term. They're more like clones, which I can't think of too many movies in the 60s that talk about cloning, which I thought was interesting.
No.
Speaking of cloning, and also people's attitudes toward this movie, I actually found this little quotation from Honda, who actually said he wasn't even too fond of this movie, which I'm sure would disappoint a lot of people to hear that. He said, quote, "I found this one a little boring. I am glad people like it, but that film didn't really have much heart. I was mainly interested in the idea of cloning, which is a social issue now. You could make a great scientific drama about that."
Good old Hishiro Honda.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the reason why, as I already mentioned, the kaiju stuff in this is actually really good. But why do you think this movie gets more attention than, say, Frankenstein Conquers the World in the fandom?
That much I cannot answer. It is a mystery to myself. It's the same thing with a lot of different Godzilla movies. I mean, everybody's going to like what they like. You know, there's no problem with that. And same thing with disliking. You know, people are going to dislike what you and I might like, but that's just the way nature is. But compared to Frankenstein Conquers the World, this movie, I would say it cannot hold a candle to it.
Yeah. I would argue that the kaiju stuff in this is probably better, but Frankenstein is superior, I think, in every other regard, personally.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason why this has gotten a little bit more noteworthy than Frankenstein is there have been a couple of noteworthy celebrities who have mentioned that they like this movie. Like Brad Pitt, apparently. At the 84th Academy Awards in 2012, he said this was the first movie he could remember seeing. And also, apparently, it's a favorite of Quentin Tarantino. Or at the very least, he said it was influential on him. I'd like to know how.
Yeah.
Can you imagine Quentin Tarantino directing a kaiju movie? That would be insane.
Yeah, it wouldn't be just insane. I think it'd be pretty bad if you ask me.
Oh, this is the episode of Hot Takes, apparently. Someone is not a Tarantino fan here, I take it. But in my research, I did actually find a few people who tried to find some substance in this film. And I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if this was really on the minds of the filmmakers as they were doing this, but these are interesting, to say the least. Peter H. Brothers, in his book Mushroom Clouds and Mushroom Men, which was kind of the closest thing to an actual biography for Honda up until Rifo and Gutachevsky did theirs, he actually thinks that this movie, believe it or not, Ben, is a commentary on the Vietnam War.
Yeah, I've actually read his book. You know, it's a pretty good book. Don't get me wrong, but I don't see the connection there.
It's loose, to say the least, but he says since Gaira is green, aggressive, and somewhat Asian-looking, okay, that he represents the country of Vietnam, while the Caucasian-looking and principled Sanda, okay, is America. Now, from what I've read, because I'm not as familiar with the dub version of this as I am the Japanese, this is emphasized a bit more in the dub version, because Dr. Stewart, our favorite guy, Russ Tamblyn, calls Gaira a hawk and Sanda a dove, and Brothers argues that because there's no clear winner in the fight, going back to the ending here a little bit, because there's a volcano that just comes out of nowhere and swallows up the monsters.
Yep.
So there's no clear winner. Now, I will just kind of inject here real quick. I do feel for Sanda, but there was nothing close to redemption for Gaira in this, so I don't really feel for him. So because there was no clear winner in this fight between the brothers, he's saying that's indicative of the fact that there was no clear winner in the Vietnam War. Okay.
Which we know that's not true.
Well, in 1966, yeah, that was a quagmire. Want to hear more about that? Check out my Kong Skull Island episode with Dallas Mora. Now, this actually, Ben, I think you could speak to a little bit because we've talked a bit about this on Twitter, I know. But Jason Barr, author of a book called The Kaiju Film. Have you ever read that?
No, I've heard of it. I've yet to pick it up.
I highly recommend it. It is fantastic. He's an English teacher, actually, an English professor. Talks a lot about different things that are seen throughout a lot of different kaiju movies. But he actually interprets Sanda and Gaira much differently. He argues that they represent two different national identities in Japan. The ultra-nationalist right that downplays or ignores war crimes to argue for a more pro-military stance, and the Japanese left that prefers to use war crimes to de-emphasize the military. So we see Sanda and Gaira as the mirror image of these two identities. And their brother against brother conflict with Sanda trying to save the violent Gaira, he says, serves as a warning that these opposing ideals have to be reconciled or the country will be destroyed. Now, this is a long-standing cultural conflict in Japan because it wasn't until the 80s that school textbooks even addressed the issue of the nation's role in the war. And it's been very contentious ever since because they've tried excising mentions of the atrocities that were committed, or they soften the language, so they might do something like change the word invading to advancing.
Yeah.
And it's something that goes on to this day.
Yep. And not really just Japan, but worldwide, too, if you look at it.
Yeah. This debate actually flared up again a few years ago when Shin Godzilla came out, because that was a big to-do. People getting all up in arms about the politics of Shin Godzilla. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. You know, people can say what they want about Shin Godzilla. I will stand my ground and argue that it is still one of the best Godzilla movies within the last 30 years.
I would agree with you there. But like I said, it brought all of this to the surface once again. And it's just one of those things. I mean, I work here on Monster Island with a lot of Japanese people, and on one hand, I'm not all that surprised by this because, Japanese culture is big on, I mean, mind you, this is coming from a dirty American looking at everything from the outside. It's a very shame-based culture, and I don't think they like remembering any of this. Who would, honestly? But
yeah,
it's not something that you could ignore, which, we've mentioned Shin Godzilla, but there's another Godzilla film that touched on this, which is GMK. Our friend Jack actually wrote an article a few years ago talking about both of these movies together. And how GMK preferred to address the issue head on and say that it shouldn't be forgotten, which is really interesting. But I don't know. I still think it's reading into it a little bit. It's probably trying to find something that isn't necessarily there, but who knows? It may have been in the backs of the creators' minds. I mean,
going on the Jack's article, that's a great article.
Yeah, I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
He'll love that.
Yeah. So that's most of what I thought were the important things to mention about this movie. Is there anything that you have that you'd like to cover before we wrap things up here a little bit?
From the political stance, no. But from the kaiju genre, people, I've seen people ask for like a remake of this movie. And the closest thing that they will get with that is, and say what you will about these movies, but I find them to be highly entertaining, that being the Attack on Titan live action movies.
That's interesting. I know Jack speaks very highly of them, which puts him in the minority because a lot of people don't like those movies. Now, I've seen the anime, and I like the anime.
Yeah, the Attack on Titan movies, I feel like, are much more entertaining than War of the Gargantuas. I will give it that.
I'm not one to advocate for remakes, but I think this is one I wouldn't mind seeing be remade.
Without the song.
Yes, without the song. Unless you can find a way to make it funny. Because I know the song's been referenced, actually, in a few places. Like, Scooby-Doo has even parodied that scene. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's gained some notoriety, apparently. I guess we could thank Brad Pitt for that. Or just the nerds who make Scooby-Doo.
Or both.
Yeah, probably both. But hey, it does have Kumi Mizuno in it. I mean, you can't go wrong there.
That's true.
I'm a little more partial to Akiko Wakabayashi personally, but...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Man of culture, I
see. Where's that gif when you need it? That anime gif. I see you are also a man of culture. But I will say one fun little thing I'll throw out here. There was a scene early on in this movie. I'll end on this. That actually, I'm thinking of a line from an MST3K episode for Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, where they're watching a movie called, the movie Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, and there's a clip of Casablanca that gets snuck into it. And the joke was, don't show a good movie in your bad movie. I'm kind of doing something similar here, except it might be for a worse movie. I don't know. Actually, it probably is. But there's a scene early on in More of the Gargantuas that reminds me of Godzilla 98. Because you have this guy who was on a boat that was attacked by Gaira and the giant octopus, Udako, which is interesting. You want to talk about trying to tie it to Frankenstein Conquers the World, but that's only if you use the alternate ending. So he survives it, and then he gets interrogated at a hospital, and that made me think of Sean Renault, the bright spot of that movie. Talking to the Japanese guy who's the one guy who survived Zilla's attack. Yeah. Except that you don't have the cool part where he's holding the lighter in front of the guy's face, unfortunately. But this sort of a scene was fairly common with a lot of Toho's kaiju movies. You saw it in Godzilla 54, it was in Mothra. They like starting off their kaiju movies with attacks on boats.
Yep.
So let that sit for a little while. It's possible, I say, that Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich saw War of the Gargantuas at some point. Maybe. They probably saw that and didn't see a single Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
The one kaiju movie.
It's obviously saw Jurassic Park.
So did everybody. That is another movie for another episode on another day, my friend. Alrighty. Well, I think now would be a good time to wrap things up. If I remember correctly, I think you have a book signing here at the Sekozawa Library for, what is it again? Discovering Tokusatsu?
Yes.
All right. Well, while we're talking about that, give us some plugs for all your stuff, some shameless self-promotion, because an episode of Monster Island Film Vault is not complete without shameless self-promotion.
So for anyone that's interested in checking out my book, Discovering Tokusatsu, it is available on Amazon. You can either purchase the paperback or get the Kindle edition, whichever you prefer.
Oh, it's on Kindle now? That's exciting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's been on Kindle since the publication.
Oh, hot dang. I've just been so used to having my physical copy.
But I have some interviews that are supposed to be going up on Sci-Fi Japan any day now. I'm just waiting on Keith to get back with me to let me know when they're going to be posted.
Keith is the editor of the website?
Yeah, Keith Aiken. Humble gentleman. You know, he's a great guy to chat with. But to give one spoiler on one interview I'm very, very proud of is with Takashi Yagi on Ultraman Nexus, Ultraman Max, and Ultra Q Dark Fantasy. I got to talk with him about his involvement with those, and it's a very informative interview piece. I can't wait for that one to go up.
To call you a stan for Ultraman Nexus would be an understatement.
At this point, you might as well say so. I'm going to parrot that Nexus is probably my favorite Toku.
Ooh.
Maybe that's just me, but I'm going to parrot that is my favorite Toku. But I am in the process now of working on another book, but that will have more details about that much later on.
Would you like to come back on the show and talk about that one when it's done?
Possibly, because I know that we're supposed to be getting back together for my favorite Ultraman movie, that being The Next.
Ultraman The Next, yes. It is on one of the many proposals that I have submitted to the board of directors for future seasons of the show. And I refuse to record on Ultraman The Next with anybody but you. I have made that clear to them. It's like, this man knows more about this movie than anyone else in the English-speaking world. Unless they actually, by some act of God, worked on the movie.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, I'm sure somebody else knows the details as well. But yeah, I've got a lot of great information that I've translated from these books about the making of the movie and many, many interviews with the cast and the staff. So I look forward to putting that stuff out there when the time comes.
Mm-hmm. Heck, you may find a few more over at the library today on the island. You never know. Hey, everybody. Ben didn't feel like doing the Patreon shoutouts, so I'm doing them solo as an insert. Travis Alexander, Michael Hamilton, Chris Cook, Danny Demana, Eli Harris, Bex from Redeemed Otaku. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate what you're doing, supporting the show. And you too, kaiju lovers, can get perks like this and so much more starting at only $3 a month on Patreon. Check out the link in our Patreon in the show notes to learn more. Alrighty, well, now that you got your plugs out of the way, I will let all of the kaiju lovers know that our next episode will be, and Jimmy will be back, finally. Not finally, it's only a few more days that he's on leave. He will be back, and we will be covering yet another Toho classic. In this case, probably a little bit less of a classic, depending on how you feel about, say, Cesar Romero, but Latitude Zero. Have you seen Latitude Zero, Ben?
Do we even acknowledge that one?
That's one way to put it. Yeah, so Latitude Zero will be our next episode, and then comes, and it's weird for me to think this, Ben, it's weird for me to say it, our season finale. We will be discussing, again, another Toho classic and maybe a lesser classic, depending on how you want to look at it, Space Amoeba, also known as Yog Monster from Space.
That's okay. I like it.
Yeah, and I will be joined, interestingly, by Graydon and Matt from the Giant Monster BS podcast. So that one should be fun. And yes, the BS stands for exactly what you think it means. Yeah, give them a listen, Ben. You would probably find them amusing.
Yeah.
All right. With that, thank you very much, Jet Jaguar, for all the work that you did in the producer booth today. I understood maybe half of that. Did you ever get that plane to land? I'm just saying. Anyway, so with that, cue credits. Thank you for listening to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast produced and hosted by Nathan Marchand. If you enjoy the show and want to join the discussion, we'd love to hear from you. So email us at feedback@monsterislandfilmvault.com. Your message could be read on a future episode of the show. Our website is monsterislandfilmvault.com. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Monster Island Film Vault, and on Twitter, where our handle is TheMonsterIsla1. You can also follow Jimmy from NASA on Twitter at NASAJimmy. I have fulfilled my contractual obligations. The podcast logo was created by Tyler Souls from TylerDrawsComics.com. Our theme song is Wander on the Offensive, live edit by B33J, Sarax, Juan Madrano, and Nonsensical Lexus, which is a remix of Counterattack, Battle with the Colossus, and The Open Way, Battle with the Colossus by Ko Otani from the video game Shadow of the Colossus. It can be downloaded from ocremix.org. All film and audio clips belong to their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended or implied. The show is available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, and other fine podcatchers. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts to spread the word about the show. You can also support MIFV on Patreon. The Monster Island Film Vault is a Moonlighting Ninjas media production. Sayonara!